This is really, really important. The BBC can't be allowed to get away with this. What I'm about to show you is a clip from BBC coverage. It's coverage of the imminent arrival of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, and it's discussing his coming economic policies. Let's have a little look.
But the new government has to decide extremely quickly what spending cuts it's prepared to make, what constraints on the public purse it's prepared to countenance, and what tax rises might be coming. 7 weeks ago, Liz Truss stood at that very lectern and told us all the big tax cuts were coming. That was the Conservative plan to boost economic growth. What we're about to see in the next few days is the exact opposite. The economic backdrop has changed. Mr. Sunak is going to have to agree to spending cuts and to tax rises.
So let me read back the offending comments. The economic backdrop has changed. Mr. Sunak is going to have to agree to spending cuts and to tax rises. No, he's not. That's a political choice. What the BBC is there doing is making spending cuts, austerity, look inevitable. There is absolutely no alternative whatsoever. And if you're angry about the cuts, because these cuts are going to be profoundly unpopular, the BBC's message to you is, well, don't blame the government for them, because the government have no choice. They're simply doing what economic necessity dictates they have to do. But that is not true at all. The government, if they chose to, could instead focus on tax rises. And by the way, I should say, you could argue equally that they shouldn't say has to agree to tax rises. That's also a political choice. They could choose to do entirely spending cuts or entirely tax rises. But that's the point. They're supposed to be impartial. This is a straightforward violation of journalistic objectivity. So, for example, I'll give you an example. In 2020, a wealth tax commission was set up with some of the world's leading tax experts. One of the leading figures in it, in fact, was actually a tax expert whose job it is to help wealthy clients navigate around tax law for their own financial benefit. So it was literally designed to avoid the problem of loopholes being exploited. Now, what they found that if you set a threshold of £1 million per household, assuming two individuals with £500,000 each, and a rate of 1% per year on wealth above the threshold, a one-off wealth tax would raise £260 billion over 5 years after administration costs. So the point they're making, this wealth commission, which was set up by leading experts, is you could raise £260 billion over 5 years. So that is an example of a political choice the government could take instead of relying on spending cuts. They could also, for example, increase income tax, let's say introducing a new tax rate for those earning £80,000 or more. That's the top 5%. That's another way they could increase taxes to avoid spending cuts. They could do a whole array of increased progressive taxes on people who have earned or whose wealth has boomed in the last few years, including during the pandemic. But the BBC is not presenting even this massive, huge document, which was created by world-leading tax experts. You'd think maybe that deserves a hearing. It was only designed less than 2 years ago. Massive amount of detailed academic work. But instead what they're doing is softening up the British public. They're acting, if you like, as an arm of government economic propaganda. They're telling you that however upset you're going to be about these spending cuts, suck it up. And you know what? We had this during austerity. It's bad enough the right-wing press in this country making it out like there was no alternative to the cuts that George Osborne in particular pursued. But the BBC is normalising the idea of austerity instead of presenting alternative arguments and making it clear that this is a choice. It is a decision that the government is deciding to take, and a Conservative government, of course, will do that because they don't want to increase taxes on people who are wealthy and higher earners. They may have to do some of those because there's no alternative, but they won't go as far as possible to avoid spending cuts. So we have to take a stand against this, because if this is normalised, if the BBC just keep doing this, then you will have the general public softened up to just accept and to be resigned to Rishi Sunak's economic agenda as though there isn't an alternative. So this is why we have to complain. If we complain now, then it will hopefully deter them from violating journalistic objectivity or asking for his objectivity, because they know that they will otherwise have complaints about the violations of objectivity which happened in that report. So what I've done in the link in this video is include the form to complain to the BBC. And of course, what we're talking about here is a direct quote. The economic backdrop has changed. That is a fact. No one's denying that. Mr. Sunak is going to have to agree to spending cuts and to tax rises. Not a fact. Not objective. Now, what's so pernicious about this? The BBC have form. They once presented Rishi Sunak, and if you don't believe me, brace yourself. They presented Rishi Sunak as Superman. So, I mean, you can see why, in the general context of things, this is particularly egregious. We could go back to the financial crash where research by Cardiff University found this. BBC presented bankers as impartial witnesses rather than as, well, I don't know, they should have been, in journalistically speaking, in the dock being prosecuted for their role in financial disaster, but they instead were just kind of experts. I mean, it would be like interviewing trade union leaders during the winter of discontent by the BBC as though they were impartial witnesses, which is not how the BBC did, of course, portray that in the 1970s. Again, we have business leaders on TV far more than trade union leaders. Again, every bit of research shows that. These violations of, the BBC presents market economics as just the norm. And that's where austerity and rolling back the state just is presented as just neutral economics rather than ideologically charged decisions. So we have to take on this bias, because otherwise they'll keep doing it, and they'll do it to such a degree that they'll have an impact on public opinion in deflecting anger and neutralising public anger, which is more than justified at the ideological decisions Rishi Sunak and likely his continued Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is going to take. Please spread the message with this word, share the video, press like, of course, and also, if this is YouTube you're watching it on, then subscribe. As ever, thanks for watching. See you soon.